Aloha. I'm Virginia Aycock. Thank you for joining me today for Question, Prize, Benefit. And today's program is titled Daniel in the Lion's Den. That's a favorite Bible story of children, isn't it? It just so happens that the 12 chapters in the book of Daniel in the Bible are all very thrilling to read. Many of them tell of phenomenal experiences that Daniel had and his Hebrew companions. These Hebrew boys were captured at the fall of Jerusalem and taken into Babylon as captives. Daniel served under several kings there. And at the time of this story, in Daniel 6, he is serving under the government of King Darius. In fact, I'm going to go back a little bit and just tell you at what level he is serving. He's not serving as a slave or a captive any longer. He's serving as the chief of the administrators under King Darius. In the beginning of the book of Daniel, some of you will recall that there were, now I have not refreshed my memory on this. I didn't think about the fact that I would be telling you this part of the story. I think there were 10 Hebrew children that were selected among the Babylonian children to serve the king, to be brought up as Babylonians, to eat the same food as the Babylonians, be taught and educated in a very superior way. So 10 children, I believe it was 10, were selected because of their apparent superior abilities, intelligence, and skills. Among these was Daniel. And so they were set under a tutor or a particular person. And as they were going through what was going to be required of these Hebrew boys, Daniel went to this leader, the supervisor, and he said, "We children of Israel do not want to eat the same food that you'll be giving everyone else. We are a religious people. We serve one God, one Spirit, which is God, and it would be against our religious beliefs." And of course, the supervisor felt he couldn't possibly accommodate Daniel and the other Hebrew children because they wouldn't fare as well physically and in health as would the other Babylonian children. But Daniel talked him into it. He said, "Well, why don't you just try this for 10 days? Just give us pulse and water to eat. And then at the end of 10 days, if you find that we are not as healthy, not as fair, not as fat as the other children, then we will go ahead and eat your diet." And so he agreed to do that. I think he felt he could risk it for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, he found that the Hebrew children were actually fairer, healthier, better off than the children who had eaten a different diet. And so he agreed that they would continue in that route. Again, another time, some of these Hebrew captives got into trouble, and it was always in relationship to their worship of their God, the God of Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, the God that had led the children of Israel out of captivity through the wilderness into the promised land. This was the God they were committed to serving, and they were always on the spot with the Babylonians because of their religious worship, their precepts, and their devotion, their fidelity to what they considered to be right worship. And so at one point, 3 of the Hebrew children were cast into the fire. That's another story that's a favorite of children. They were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And the king, I'm not sure what king that was they were under at the time. I think it was Nebuchadnezzar, but I'm not positive. the king begged them to stop worshiping as they did and to change their minds so that he wouldn't have to throw them into the fire, the fiery furnace. But they said, no, we don't want your help. We trust in the help of our God. So whether you would save us or not will make no difference, because we will still trust in our God to save us. So they were cast into the fiery furnace, and the fiery furnace was actually heated up 7 times more than it normally was, and they did not burn. Their clothing did not burn, and it appeared that there was a 4th person walking around in the midst of the fire with them. So they were saved. They came out without even the smell of smoke on them. So when we go through fiery trials, it certainly is nice to think about that and remember that through our trust in God, we can find our way out of fiery trials, that we are, in a sense, being tested on our own loyalty, our own fidelity to God. So now we get to the story that I want to talk about today, and that is Daniel in the lion's den. He is serving under King Darius, as I said, and he has been put, the king at least is considering putting him above all his other princes, because he has found him to be the most skillful, the most helpful, the best in counsel to the king. And so I think maybe it would be best if I read some of this story to you, so I will proceed to do that. Maybe not every word of it, but from the book of Daniel, chapter 6, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which would be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 presidents, Daniel would be first. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find none occasion or fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. I think that's an important point. When you are working in a government, and it just so happens that today was the opening of the 113th Congress of the United States. I watched some of the swearing-in ceremony this morning on television. So it's a day that we can be thinking about and looking forward to good government and praying for good government. But we see here among these princes, and Daniel being chief among these princes of 120, we see jealousy rising up. Daniel was first, so the others wanted to find fault with him. We want to pray that that does not go on within our government. We know it does all the time, but our prayers can have an effect. And those who are in the highest offices and places can receive the kind of protection that I'm going to talk with you about today, the kind of protection that Daniel did. Because Daniel was loyal to the king. He was not false to the king. He was not false to his God, but he had consistently been loyal and faithful to the king. He just did not put away his God. He did not worship idols. He did not entertain any sort of idolatry. So these princes reasoned, because he was so loyal to the king and there was no error in him whatsoever, they reasoned that if they were ever going to find any fault with him, it was going to have to be through his worship of his God. So they devised a plan. They came up with a conspiracy. They duped the king into signing a decree that they knew would catch Daniel in the act of praying. So let me read you about this. Beginning with verse 6. the Bible says, then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. So you see, they're using flattery. They're flattering the king as though the king were a god himself. Everyone must look to you, King Darius, for every need. Ask you for whatever he needs and whatever he wants. And nothing, no other person, no other god should he ask. The king went for that decree. He said, okay, we will make that a decree. This flattery certainly got him to agree. And of course, he was not at all thinking of Daniel or the Hebrew boys. This was not in his mind when he agreed to this. So we go on with the writing. King Darius signed the writing and the decree. So even after, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in the chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. He did not interrupt his routine in the least because his first loyalty was to God. In the New Testament, and of course Daniel, the book of Daniel is in the Old Testament, the New Testament has Christ Jesus saying to his followers, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. That has to be a precept that Daniel and the Hebrew boys and the Jewish religion must have known about and practiced, because Daniel knew the consequences of his turning to God and praying to God once. To do it once in 30 days was a crime against this decree, but he did it 3 times every day, as he had always done. So these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. So then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. And they said to the king, know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king established may be changed. Then the king commanded, and they brought forth Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. And the king spake unto Daniel and said unto him, thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. Isn't that a marvelous statement coming from King Darius, who was not Hebrew? This was not the God that he served. This was not. This was an unusual thing for a king to say to one of his princes or servants, that your God will save you. I think that shows that he had already had so many experiences with Daniel, showing Daniel's, in which Daniel showed his spiritual acumen, his understanding of God, his confident relationship with God, his trustfulness of God, and God's trustworthiness towards him to meet his needs. So the king rose up very early in the morning and went in haste into the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, Is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent his angel, and hath shut the lions' mouth, that they have not hurt me. Forasmuch as before him, God, innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. There's a very famous painting of Daniel in the lion's den, where the light is coming through the window of this den, a small upper window. Daniel is kneeling and praying in this light, and the lions are behind Daniel's back, and they are relaxed and docile. Remember the statement that we have that a little child shall lead them. It's from the Bible, that we shall lay down with the lion and the adder, and will suffer no hurt, and a little child shall lead them. So Daniel had a childlike thought. The Bible goes on to say, Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, Peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion in my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. So isn't that just marvelous? And just so that I can move along a little bit quickly, I want to tell you a real life experience that I had that relates to this story in the Bible. As an answer to prayer, this particular story in the Bible came to me, so I'm just going to try to go through it quickly. I was in college, and I was poor in college, like so many students are, just kind of trying to make my way. And I had had a roommate for a year, and I was going to move out. She was going to keep her apartment by herself. And I found an apartment, I made a deposit on it, and there was work going on in this apartment. They were putting in a new sink and kitchen equipment and various things. So the time came for me to move in. And I went over to get ready to move in, and I found that they had not completed the kitchen, that the water was not on. So I called the rental company and said, I can't move in, it's not ready. And so they said, okay. I said, let me know when it is ready. So the following Friday, about a week later, I received a call from the secretary of this rental office, and she said, you are moving in tomorrow. And I said, okay, well, I will be happy to move in. I'm going to go over and see that everything's finished. And she said, you are moving in tomorrow. You've signed a lease, whether it's finished or not. And I said, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to move in if it isn't finished. And so she was very forceful. And she said, well, what difference does it make to you? Because you're not paying rent where you are now. And I said, well, you're mistaken. I am paying rent as long as I'm staying with my roommate. But I will move in. I'm going over today, right now, to see if it's finished. And I went over, and it was really in the same state that it had been in before. There was no water. There was really no kitchen. And I had the idea that I would not want to move in here at all, since they were being so forceful and trying to get me to move in, even though it wasn't finished. So I wrote the rental company a letter and spoke to the issue that they had been very forceful in trying to get me to move in, that the apartment was not ready, and that therefore I was not going to honor the lease any further, that it was already a week or two behind the origination date, and that I wanted my deposit back. And I didn't hear from them at all, but I went on to rent another apartment. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had lost my deposit. And so there was a friend of mine who was an attorney. He was a fellow church member. And I used to have lunch with lots of different people after church on Sundays. And one time I told him this story. And he advised me, why don't you take them to court? Go to small claims court and get your deposit back. That had not occurred to me, but I admired this person, trusted him, and I thought, well, that's a good idea. I will do that. I filed all the claims for going to small claims court to get my deposit back. And the first time I showed up, no one showed up on the other side, so I won by default. And so they set another date, and they said, if no one shows up the second time, you have won this case. But the second time I showed up, I had been advised, as a matter of fact, that they were going to send their lawyers to hear and to try the case, and that they were going to counter-sue because I had not fulfilled my obligation on the lease. I was just terrified. Now, it's so interesting that I was terrified because had they sued me, they really wouldn't have gotten anything because I did not have any money to speak of. And I have no idea why I was so afraid. But of course, I was in the habit of turning to God in prayer. And I did. I even asked a friend to pray for me as well. And as I prayed that day, trembling with the thought that I was going to have to go to court that afternoon, it came to me so clearly the story of Daniel in the lion's den. I thought there was a parallel because it came to me that King Darius had been tricked into signing this decree. And I thought, that's very interesting because I've been tricked into signing a lease on an apartment that was not ready, and who knows when it was ever going to be ready. And I began to just go through the story of Daniel in Daniel 6 in the Bible, and I applied every single idea to my situation, and that I, like Daniel, was praying and that I was trusting God, and that even though I felt like I was going to be thrown into the lion's den in front of a couple of high-flying lawyers, I felt I did not have to be afraid. Daniel was not afraid in the lion's den, that I could trust God all the way. So I went to court, and I was listening to the various cases that were being called before my case. And as I sat there, I really did not have any fear any longer. And I had a wonderful statement come to me. I would say it was an angel that came to me and whispered in my ear this line. It's going to sound a little bit funny to you. It did to me too. I had to really think about what it meant. But the very words that came to my thought from this angel message from God were these: to mortality's own selfhood, justice consigns the lie. And that was startling to me. And I thought, to mortality's own selfhood, well, that would be to death. And I thought, okay, the lie which is going to be put forth on the other side is going to be consigned to death. It has no validity. It's a lie. And so when I got up, when the judge called our case, and I was asked to state my case, I was stunned at the vibrancy of my voice, of the clarity of my voice, and the words that came out of my mouth. And the judge, within minutes, discerned what was going on so very clearly. He handed an envelope to me, asked me to write my address on that envelope, and he also wrote his address on an envelope. He handed the envelope to the two lawyers and said, please put a check for her deposit into the mail to her, and he gave me an envelope with his address on it, and he said, and if you don't receive that check within a week, you let me know by mailing this envelope back to me. So that's my experience of how practical stories that are so meaningful in the Bible can be in our very lives. So I've always cherished this story, cherished Daniel in the lion's den, cherished my own situation of being almost in a lion's den, so to speak. That was my trial. So I bid you and pray for you that you will open your heart to the Bible truths. Let the Bible form questions in your mind so that you will reap the prizes and the benefits that God has for you. Aloha, Virginia Aycock, signing off.